Please explain to me what intelligibility is.
So intelligibility is how you can understand things such that knowledge about them is possible. So for example, one of the things that's wrong with a lot of reductionism is it uses what I call standard naturalism, which is we derive our ontology from our scientific frameworks, right? So our ontology has to be what is derivable from our fundamental physics. Perhaps you loosen that up a bit on fundamental physics and chemistry and biology or whatever, right? There's variations on that, but that's not relevant to my argument. But notice what's not being accounted for there, but which is being presupposed. Well, you know what is being presupposed? Scientists doing science. And what do the scientists need to do science? Well, there has to be real information. There has to be real patterns. There has to be real measurement. There has to be real debate. There has to be real criticism. There has to be real meaning. There has to be real truth. There has to be real rationality. And then where is that in your fundamental ontology? It's not. But if you don't have those things, you can't actually explain how you have the knowledge you have. The knowledge is hanging out here in some nebulous, non-ontological space, or sometimes you just put it dualistically into the mind and then you have a horrible ontology, right? It's just there.
And this would be the case even for an instrumentalist or a pragmatist?
In what way? You'd be a little bit more clear what you mean by that. I mean, it's the case that if they think they're not talking about anything real, their ontology is not going to be reductionist, right? Their ontology is going to be reducible just to the level at which they are doing.
What they may say is that, what is this real that you're talking about? All I know is that when I do so-and-so seems to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some correlations or some patterns, and it helps us get by. So what is this real? Like, we can talk about maybe we're getting closer to the truth, whatever that means, but that would be the closest we can get to even speaking about what is, because to say what is, we'd have to presume some definition of realness.
Tremendous performative contradiction, right? Because what they're saying is, oh, well, I'm not making use of real. Why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? Because they think there's a better explanation. Even if it stays within the domain of, I don't know what to call it, everyday experience.
Well, they could be doing what they're doing because they want to have sex, and ultimately somehow it leads to that.
It has what? Actual causal changes to their ability to interact. Like there's always a crypto measure of how I'm judging that things are real, that I'm getting a better explanation, that I'm getting more control over my environment. I can more reliably achieve the goals I want. But you're always standing back and saying, but how do you know any of that? How do you know that that's the case? Oh, well, because I do this and this and this. And when I don't do that, I might be deceived or it might be mere appearance. But when I do these things, I can have more confidence. Soon as you're making any kind of epistemic choice where you're placing more confidence in one thing rather than another and choosing one thing over another, you have an implicit criterion of realness.
Firstly, I'm not an instrumentalist nor a pragmatist. Are you defining real? Do you have a definition of real in your mind that you're...
Real is a comparative term. Right. So like it's like
so-and-so is more real than something.
Right. And also vice versa. If I say that is an error or that's an illusion or that's a delusion, I only can do it in contrast and comparison to something I point at and say, this is not a delusion. This is not an error. This is true. This is how things are. Even the instrumentalists can't believe that the experience of looking at their instruments is fundamentally an illusion. What are they basing their instrumentalism on?
Well, I don't think the instrumentalist would say that what they're doing is even knowledge. They may just say, what are you talking about? What is this talk of real and knowledge? This just happens to happen. This is correlated with so-and-so. I get to work.
Did they know that before they did their practice, that there was a correlation? Are they right about that? Could they be wrong about it? their claim that they're not making any knowledge claim is duplicitous, because of course somebody can come along and say, hey, you're actually wrong about that correlation. We did a bigger study. Turns out that correlation isn't there. So they could be wrong, they can be right, and they claim to know something. They claim to know the correlation. They're not getting out of this.
The claim about real being relational, X is real only in relation to Y or more real, is that itself a relational claim?
Yes, exactly. So real is like tall, right? You're always you're drawing, you're making. It's not unintelligible to say that's tall. It's unintelligible to say, imagine a universe in which there's one thing and it's tall.
Okay, well, in this case, it would be like saying so-and-so is taller. Okay, Adam is taller than Sarah.
Right.
But me saying that is taller than so-and-so. Like you saying X is more real than Y. Is there a reality to that statement such that that statement alone can be in comparison to something else?
So what do you mean by reality? Does it really refer, or like, does it refer to something that exists independent of the statement? What do you mean?
Okay, if you have that this microphone here is more real than our idea of the microphone. Let's just say that.
Okay.
This microphone here is more real than what we think of as the microphone.
Yes.
Okay. That statement, would you ascribe reality to that statement, to the statement about that you can compare between two objects, some relation that says that they're real, this one's more real than this one? Is that itself subject to that comparison?
Of course it is. Because notice, is this something, do you know that you made that statement? Is that statement connected, and does it explain other things that you do? Is it explainable by other beliefs you have? Of course. To the degree to which it unpacks intelligibility, you attribute realness to it.
The trouble is, though, so I'm sure you know naive realism, which says that what's real is independent of our minds.
Sure.
Okay. Automatically, you're saying that doesn't even count as real.
So the problem with the question is it presupposes the substance metaphysics I'm rejecting, right? It's saying that there's things that exist, and they exist as they do, completely independent of how we know them. And I don't know what that means. But that's not the same thing as saying I'm an idealist and saying, oh, well, there's no difference between that, because that also removes the relation. It's like, no, there's a real relationship between my knowing the thing and the thing. They're bound together in the knowledge, in the truth. I don't know what it would mean to say that the thing is either completely independent of how I know it. What would that mean?
Could it be? So what I mean to say is, I know that you're saying, I don't know. Okay, in that sentence alone, I don't know. I, as the subject, cannot know so-and-so.
Yeah.
Maybe you're already removing this distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm saying that embedded in that sentence already rejects the independent notion of realism, because you're saying, I don't know it. But just because you don't know it doesn't mean it couldn't be. Now, of course, like there could be unicorns. There could be so-and-so. I'm just saying, what would be the consequence of something? So in physics, there's magnets, and they have a
polarity.
They have a polarity, and there's no such thing as a magnetic monopole. There's no such thing as you can't just find one.
That's right.
North.
Yeah.
Turns out if you did, there would be drastic effects for all the rest of physics, like electric charge would be quantized, which it actually is, and that may be one of the explanations. But just the fact of one single monopole has implications for physics.
That's right.
So what I'm saying is there some implication in your ontology that if there was something real that was independent of minds, there would be some consequence?
Yes, of course.
Maybe you don't observe this consequence, but what would that consequence be? And is it desirable? How do you feel about that consequence? What is it?
Well, first of all, I want to point out what you just did. You made an implicit judgment about how real that fact, let's call it, about the monopole would be. And notice that you said, oh, that makes it very important because it has the potential. And you're moving towards, notice, if it's a nexus of a tremendous amount of intelligibility, a lot of reality is wrapped up in it. Okay. So the fact that things could exist independent of any sentient being, is that the gist of your question? Or just me? Because I'm
No,
like,
independent of John. No. So sentience means subject or consciousness or pain and pleasure or what?
let's make it a little bit better. There's a capacity for some sense making that affords some kind of basic agency. Yeah.
Sure.
So one of the things that would be the case, presumably, if I admit that things can exist without there being sentient beings, which I do, is that I might be able to discover properties in those non-sentient things that could help me explain how sentient things emerged or came to be.
You care ultimately about sentience. If it didn't, you wouldn't care about it, or?
Well, I couldn't. I'd be in a. How could I? If I didn't have sentience, how could?
Oh, no. What I meant is, it's getting quite abstract if it wasn't abstract already. But this outside fact that we're saying we're going to posit perhaps exists, perhaps independent of minds, independent of sentience. And you're saying, okay, well, I care about that to the degree that it influences sentience. And I'm saying, well, let me let you finish your thought. I apologize.
So I wanted to say, it is possible within sentience, and we could play with that, to draw conclusions about what is beyond sentience, but they only are understood within sentience. Right? That's not naive realism. Naive realism says, no, it's only the way my experience and the way it is are just one and the same. It's like, no, I've got to do a lot of things precisely become I'm a realist. Well, what does that mean? I believe error is real. I believe that although I can't ever leap out of sentience, leap out of sense making, and a view from nowhere state what the truth is, I don't think that makes any sense whatsoever. It's nevertheless the case that I can be wrong, because how I'm talking about the world will show up within, propositional or performative contradictions, which is what we're wrestling with right now. Right? Within how things make sense to me or other people.
If you enjoyed this toe clipping, then the full video is linked in the description. You should also sign up for Toe Mail, which is again in the description and the pinned comment. You'll receive immediate access to all exclusive updates from the Theories of Everything podcast. It also helps me communicate directly with the core toe community. You'll also receive my top 10 toes. Think of it as the intellectual version of Quentin Tarantino's Obsession.